The paradox of all. Imagine yourself standing in a vast abyss, where the wind whispers secrets of forgotten eras, and the sheer immensity makes your chest feel small. In that moment, what you feel isn't the fear of falling, but a profound reverence for something infinitely greater than your own existence. Often we look at the scriptures and stumble upon an expression that seems contradictory: the fear of God. How can a God, defined in his essence by love, demand that his creatures tremble before him? Is faith merely an exercise in servitude through terror, or are we mistranslating the language of the soul? Many of us were taught that God is a stern judge, lurking behind every false step, waiting for the moment to punish. This vision turned spirituality into a walk on eggshells, where fear suffocates the connection. But the philosophy of life teaches us that fear paralyzes, while true fear, this biblical awe, empowers. Millions of people spend their entire lives believing that fearing God means living in fear, but the Bible teaches something very different. In this first minute, I invite you to strip away your inherited certainties. Let us understand why this fear is not the opposite of love, but the frame that makes it sacred. If you have ever felt watched by a gaze of condemnation, prepare yourself. What the Bible truly proposes is not a life of scares, but an existence of wonder. The great misunderstanding. There is an abysmal difference between being startled and being reverent. Yet for centuries, humanity has built cathedrals upon the foundation of guilt. We learn to see divinity through the lens of the fear of punishment, as if the Creator were an implacable sentry, noting flaws in a book of eternal sentences. This perspective transformed religion into a sort of insurance policy against bad luck or hell. When faith is based solely on the dread of consequences, it ceases to be a search for light and becomes a flight from the shadows. The result is an exhausted spirit. After all, who can truly love someone they are terrified of? The figure of God as a stern judge, a distant and punitive monarch, is, in truth, a reflection of our own human insecurities projected onto the heavens. We created a system where obedience is born not of admiration, but of the survival instinct. It is a startled spirituality, where the heart never rests because it is always waiting for the next blow of fate. The weight of this misinterpretation is visible in the eyes of those who have given up. Many people walk away from faith because they believe God wants to frighten them. They mistake the thunder for the voice of an enemy, when the thunder is simply proof that the sky is too vast to be contained in small explanations. The true tragedy of this misunderstanding is that it creates orphans of a father who never abandoned them. If you spent years feeling you needed to hide from God to be accepted, understand this: fear is a barrier we built. Holiness is an invitation he makes. Biblical fear is not the terror of being hit. It is the deep perception that we are standing before the source of all life, and that this source is, above all else, welcoming. The original meaning: to rescue what it truly means. In the language of the soul, to fear is not the same as to be afraid. Imagine yourself now before the vastness of the ocean. As you observe the deep waters and the pull of the tides, you feel a shiver, not because the water hates you, but because you recognize a force that is impossible to control. It is a mixture of reverence, deep respect, and an admiration that silences the ego. This is true fear, the recognition of greatness. It is what we feel when looking at a starry sky and realizing we are fragments of dust loved by the architect of galaxies. It is not the fear that the universe will crush us, but the awe of being seen by something so vast. The Bible uses this perception as the starting point for any life that makes sense. In Proverbs 9:10, we read that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Why? Because wisdom begins the moment we admit we are not the center of the universe. When we recognize God's magnitude, our perspective shifts. Pride dissolves and gives way to learning. Psalm 111:10 reinforces this, saying that the fear of the Lord results in a good understanding for all those who practice His commandments. To live in fear is to live in a state of consciousness. It is like standing before a colossal mountain. You don't run from it in terror, but you walk carefully, aware that you are on holy ground. In the original words of Scripture, this term points to an honor so deep that it prevents us from treating what is sacred as if it were common. Wisdom is not born of panic. It flourishes in the fertile soil of admiration. If you want to be wise, do not start by trying to understand everything. Start simply by admiring the one who created everything. Did Jesus fear God? If fear were synonymous with terror, the life of Jesus would be an unsolvable enigma. Looking at the path of Christ, we do not see a paralyzed or anxious man fleeing from a punitive shadow. On the contrary, we see the personification of peace. Yet the Scriptures are clear in saying that the spirit of fear rested upon him. How is this possible? For Jesus, fear was the perfect translation of absolute trust. He did not obey the Father out of fear of punishment, but out of a loyalty born of intimacy. Every step of his journey, from the anonymity of the carpenter's shop to his public sacrifice on the cross, was moved by a reverence so deep that his own will merged with the divine will. Jesus didn't have to obey. He desired to honor the source of his own life. He lived in a submission that did not diminish him, but exalted him. Imagine a musician who deeply respects the laws of harmony. He does not feel like a prisoner to the notes. He follows them because he knows that is where the beauty of the music lives. So it was with Jesus and the Father. His obedience was his melody. He trusted the Father's character so much that this awe became the fuel for his courage. Faced with this, a question arises that silences our excuses. If Jesus himself, being one with the Father, chose to live in constant submission and reverence, what does that mean for us? If the author of life practiced this fear, it teaches us that this virtue is not for the weak or the guilty, but for those who desire fullness. To follow in Jesus' footsteps is to understand that our freedom does not lie in doing whatever we want, but in bowing before that which is eternal. What happens when there is no fear? If awe is the soil where wisdom flourishes, its absence is the desert where the ego gets lost. When we remove reverence from our lives, we do not become freer. We become prisoners of ourselves. Without the sacred weight of fear, man drifts aimlessly, guided only by pride and selfishness, believing himself to be the sole judge of his own actions. The lack of fear blinds us to consequences. This is where impulsive decisions are born, those we make, just to satisfy a momentary appetite, ignoring the eternal impact. Spiritual drifting doesn't happen suddenly. It is the result of a life that stopped looking up in admiration and started looking only in the mirror with complacency. Biblical history offers us clear mirrors of this reality. Think of Samson, a man gifted with divine strength, but lacking reverence for the gift he carried. He treated the sacred as common and ended up losing not only his vision, but his freedom. Or look at Solomon, the man who began with the beginning of wisdom, but allowed his heart to be distracted by idols and pleasures, ending his days questioning if everything was just vanity and a chasing after the wind. There is also the parable of the prodigal son. In his arrogance, he demanded his inheritance as if his father were already dead. He lost his fear, he lost his respect, and consequently, he lost his way. Only when he hit rock bottom was it that the perception of his father's greatness returned to his heart. The philosophical lesson is clear. When we stop fearing God, we start fearing everything else. We fear public opinion, we fear time, we fear scarcity. Living without fear is trying to navigate a raging ocean without a compass or an anchor. How to develop the fear of God. Awe is not a feeling that happens by chance. It is a posture one cultivates. Just as an athlete trains the body or a musician educates the ear, we must educate the soul to perceive holiness. But how, in such a noisy and distracted world, can we reclaim this perception? The first step is knowing the Word, not as a rule book, but as a map of the divine character. As you study the scriptures, the distorted image of a punitive God gives way to the reality of a majestic God. You begin to read history through the eyes of the soul, understanding that every verse is an invitation to wonder. Daily prayer then emerges as the second pillar. Praying isn't just asking, it is the exercise of placing yourself before the throne. It is the moment you silence the world to hear the whisper of the Creator, remembering that every breath of life is a generous loan. In prayer, we learn to recognize our total dependence. Developing fear requires the courage to obey even when it is hard. Obedience is the ultimate proof of reverence. It is easy to follow principles when everything is going well, but true awe is tested when God's will collides with our own. This journey requires a radical decision, placing God above your ego. Change requires intention. Start your day by acknowledging that you are on holy ground, whether in the office, the kitchen, or in traffic. Awe develops when we stop treating life as trivial and start treating it as a continuous miracle. The truth that changes everything. We have reached the point where paths cross and the truth reveals itself in its purest form. If until now you felt that fear was a barrier, it is time to tear down this last wall. The great irony of faith is that the same fear that makes us kneel is what gives us the strength to stand tall before any giant. We must engrave this certainty in our hearts. Fearing God is not running away from Him. It is drawing near with reverence, love, and trust. Imagine a child running into her father's arms during a storm. She's aware of the power of the thunder, but she knows that in his arms, that same power is her protection. The philosophy of this world tries to convince us that to be free is to have no masters. But the reality of life shows us that those who do not serve God end up serving their own fears or the expectations of others. Here lies the secret. He who fears God is not a slave to the fear of the world. When your respect for the Creator takes the place of honor, the terror of circumstances loses its power. You stop fearing economic crises or the judgment of people because your anchor is fastened to something that does not shake. Do not hide among the trees of the garden anymore, as if God were a hunter. He is the author of the beauty that makes you sigh, the awakening of the soul. Our journey through the depths of awe ends here, but your personal walk is just beginning. One question remains echoing in the silence of your heart. Did you learn to fear God out of love or out of fear? If until today your faith was moved by the dread of punishment, I invite you to trade it for the wonder of reverence. Remember, terror drives us away, but awe draws us in. Leave a comment. Share your experience. How do you see the fear of God today? Subscribe to the channel. If you seek a deep, intelligent spirituality, this is your place. Turn on the bell. Ensure every new reflection reaches you, helping to keep your flame alive amidst the noise of daily life. Thank you for walking with me this far. May your fear always be an invitation to love. See you in the next video.